All right, here we are. So I'm going to interview you all about your life divided into various epochs. So we'll start with your childhood, and then kind of teenage, transition into adulthood, and then adulthood to now. So childhood, you've told me a bit about kind of like living in Donovan and the hijinks of you and your siblings. Tell me all about it.
I lived in a two-story house that my mom and dad had moved in. It was a CN station house, I think. Before that, before mom and dad moved to town, they lived on a farm. Dad tried farming, but it didn't work out. And
what is a station house?
It's where the station master for the railway used to live. For like when the trains would stop in small communities and stuff, there were these houses provided for these people. And so I believe that's what it was that we lived, the house that I grew up in. And it was 2 bedrooms upstairs. Boys were in 1 bedroom, my brothers, 3 brothers, and my sisters and I in that room. But
is this Grandma's house or is this a different house?
It's Grandma's house.
Okay.
Yeah. And my oldest sister's 14 years older than me, so she didn't live there. Like, I don't really remember her living there. I always remember her being married. I was 3 when they got married. But I shared a bed with my sister Kathy, and she was always very sweet to me. She'd rub my back and play with my hair for me to go to sleep and that kind of thing. When she moved out, I really missed her. Really missed having that person with me.
Okay, so you got to back it up a little bit.
Okay.
Here. So, are you the middle child?
I am the second youngest child.
Second youngest, okay.
Yeah.
And Kathy's the youngest? Oh,
Tom's the youngest. Tom, me, Bernie, Ed, Kathy, Sue.
Okay.
Yeah, and when I was about 9, we moved to Bursay because Dad worked away a lot with the railway. When we moved into town, Dad got a job with the railway. Previous to that, we're on the farm, very, very poor. I don't remember any of that because I was just 2 when we moved to town. But when Dad got a steady job, life was much better for the family. And he worked away a lot, so we moved to Bursay, where he seemed to be a lot, and we lived there for 2 years. So I was about 9 and 10, grade 4, grade 5. And I had a best friend there called Debbie Mlay.
And what year is this, if you don't mind me asking?
That would be like 68, 67, 68.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah. And it was just a little bit out of town, the house was, but I mean, we could walk to town easily. You could see it from where we lived. And when we lived there, Mom babysat for some people, babysat a little girl, which of course I loved. And my brothers were teenagers, Bernie and Ed, and well, they had quite the life. Oh, I know, that's what I got to tell you.
Wild guys.
When we moved, the day we moved, Mom, of course, wanted to unpack the house, so Dad took us to the lake, and it was Lake Diefenbaker. And we're all running around, and Dad says, oh, we should just drive the car into the lake, and you guys can wash it. Like, you know, the sand's hard. So we backed it in, and we had fun washing it, but then we got stuck and couldn't drive out. And we didn't know anybody. It was the day we moved. And somehow, I was young, I don't remember, but we got a farmer to come along and pull us out of the beach. So that was kind of an embarrassing introduction to the community. But the community was so friendly, very different from Donovan. Donovan I found to be very formal and a little bit maybe cliquey stuff. But with Bursay, everybody just got along, and it was a community, and it was lots of fun.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Chica,
You put her outside.
you're crazy.
Anyway, one big exciting thing was, the rink. We'd gone to a hockey game, And a snowstorm blew in so bad that we had to stay overnight in the rink.
Oh,
And
that's
my
cool.
Uncle Joe and his kids were there for some reason. And I got to go into the dressing room because, you know, you weren't allowed there before and it was nothing very special. But we curled on the curling rink because it was joined to the skating rink. And then we slept on the benches and it was a big time. The storm blew over during the night and then we went home. Come on. Okay, stop. So that was kind of a big adventure. My brother Ed had gotten really sick when he was 12 and he spent about a year in the hospital. I'm gonna take the dog, put her outside, okay?
All right, so you guys slept over on the rink. Ed was really sick.
Yeah, previous to that, because he was about 15 when we moved there. But he had to go back to the cancer clinic every 6 months for checkups. And that was quite a drive to Saskatoon from Bursay. It was a couple hours. And we had one vehicle. And I remember Mom drove to the city, which was a big deal. And the front hood blew off when she was driving. It just blew right off. Scared her. Of course, that was big drama. We had to, you know, find the money to pay for that. When we lived in Bursay, one other memory. Ed and Bernie always liked to live off the land. And one time they went out to live on one of Ed's best friend's family's houseboat for a week. They didn't take nothing with them. Nothing. They were going to live off the land. And maybe they took eggs. Not very much. Anyways, they're gone and they're 14 and 15. And Mom and Dad didn't even go check on them, except for one time. I was worried sick. So we drove out there and they were fine, you know, living off the land. I don't know, I think they caught rabbits and shot birds and stuff like that and ate them. Swam and slept on the boat. They always had adventures. They were outdoor kids and they were always up to something and very close, very close. Always had private little jokes, would laugh and stuff. So that was a big memory for me. And the other one was Ed and his friends formed a band. None of them were old enough to drive to their gigs. So Auntie Kathy, my sister, drove them everywhere. And Ed's friend, Orville Coates' dad, bought them a trailer to pull behind the car that held all their musical equipment. And they, you know, traveled around because dances were a big thing in that day. And they got to be like pretty popular. So they would advertise a band. They'd have a girlfriend work the door and take in the money and they'd play. And of course, all that money they took in after they paid for the rental of the hall was their money. So back in the days, that would be like the early 70s, they made like $900 a night.
Wow.
So they were good. But they never practiced at home because Dad couldn't stand the noise. My dad was a veteran and any loud noises he couldn't tolerate. So they practiced out at Orville's dad's house and they spent a lot of time there. Bernie wasn't in the band, but he was always there. You know, he was a roadie kind of. And so the four of them, they did that. So that was big excitement.
Okay, a few things there. So how did you spend your time when you were a kid?
Yeah, when I was in Bursay, I had my best friend Debbie. And so we played together and visited. And her mom and dad were very easygoing, very friendly people. So I spent a lot of time there. But I was a book reader. I was not an outdoorsy kid like the rest of my family. I was a quiet kid that played quietly and read quietly. One of my earliest memories is my mom used to have like a big can of buttons and she'd place me when she was working in the kitchen at the table and I would sort them into different colors. And I was like maybe 4 or 3. My oldest sister Sue taught me how to read. So I started kindergarten, like they didn't have kindergarten back in the day. But I started school when I was 4 because my birthday's in October, and I knew how to read already because my sister Sue would read to me and her kids at the same time because she had a son the same age as my youngest brother. They're only 3 months apart. And so I spent a lot of time with her in the winter because they were cowboys and they worked away during the year when the cows were in the pasture for the PFRA. And then in the winter, they had this little tiny house trailer that they had moved beside mom and dad's and live in there. So I spent a lot of time with her. Yeah. And so that happened for about 3 years when they did that. And then they got their own, Ken became a manager of the pasture. So I can remember she had gave me a little blackboard and I was making the G's out of the library books, like, you know, how they're typed with a little tail. I was learning how to print. So I knew how to do all that before I even started school. And so I went to school in Donovan from grade 1 to 4. I did 4 and 5 in Bursay. And that was kind of a bigger school because Donovan was a 2-room school. There was grades 1 to 3 in one room and 4 to 6 in another. And in grade 7, we rode the bus to Delisle Composite. So even though they were mixed grades, there was only like maybe 30 kids in the whole school, in the Donovan school. And at one point, there was big enrollment and there were 3 classes, but that didn't last for very long. And I really liked my grade 1, 2, and 3 teacher. Her name was Linda Tyson. And as it goes, when I became a teacher, I actually worked with her a little bit in Delisle Elementary. So that was kind of a cool circle of life moment thing. The teachers never supervised outside. When you went out for recess, you were kind of on your own, and the big boys ruled. And of course, I was always scared of the big kids because I was that kind of a kid. And we played on the swings, and in the trees we played house. We made sticks and little stoves and all that. But there is a bush of trees that's kind of across the field diagonally from the school. And some of the boys at recess time, if you can imagine, 15 minutes, they would run across the field and play in those trees. And then when the teacher came out, she had a bell, you know, a big bell, and rang it, then they'd run back and come to school. That was crazy. Like, that would never happen in this day now. What else? For my grade 6 teacher was Mrs. French. Didn't really like her. She was very strict. But I never got into trouble or anything because I was that kind of kid. But my brothers, they were not academically, they're learning disabled. Like, all my siblings except for Sue are hyperactive and have trouble reading, but they're good in math. But I could read, and I was really good in school. So Mrs. French had this little red book, and if you didn't do your corrections or do your work, you had to stay in after school or during lunch or whatever, and it was called the See Me book. And my brother Ed and Bernie were in the See Me book a lot. Ed still talks about it. Because can you imagine being a kid like that, having trouble sitting still, and then missing your recess or staying after school too? It was just torture for them. I was I had a messy desk. I was a messy kind of kid. But my best friend, Heather Starling, who lived next door, she was a year younger. She was a neat bean, so she would stay after school and clean my desk for me sometimes. Oh my gosh. And we'd play school at home, and she had that whole family had a really hard life, and we spent a lot of time together. Those kids were alone a lot. She was the only girl out of a family of 6, and her mom worked away during the week, and so she'd have to buy the groceries, get food from the garden, cook the meals at 13 years old. So every week we'd drive in with her dad, and her dad would go for coffee and french fries, and we'd buy groceries. He would give her X amount of dollars to buy groceries, and that was her job. So anyway, she spent a lot of time. We spent all our time together. We were really tight and close, and all of our secrets we shared. And we used to climb up. There's a tree, a maple tree in our backyard, and her and I would climb up there and have really good talks. If we climbed up there, you knew it was going to be a serious conversation, right?
Awesome.
Yeah. And then,
Okay, a few questions. At this
okay.
time. What was Grandma doing at this time? So Grandpa's working the rails.
Yeah, so when we moved back to Donovan from Bercy, he got a permanent job in Delisle. He wasn't a roadmaster, but he was a supervisor of some sort. And Mom, she always worked for extra money, so she cleaned the Donovan school. Sometimes she'd get me to sweep or whatever, but she mowed the grass, trimmed the hedges, did it all, kept that school and yard spotless. And she decorated wedding cakes for people.
No way.
Yeah,
That's cool.
she could sew anything. And so I always, even though we didn't have a lot of money, I always had the latest fashion in clothes because she could sew them or knit them. Like I remember one time she knitted me and my sister Kathy matching sweaters. Oh, I loved that. I was so proud to be like my older sister Kathy and wear that. But yeah, so I always, I don't know where she got the energy, but our house was always clean. She grew a huge garden to feed us all the time. We had chickens in the yard in Donovan, so we always had eggs. We always had chicken meat.
Oh,
I
heard your chickens were drunk.
Yeah, one time Grandma came to visit Baba. Baba was pretty stern, and Mom had been making wine using Saskatoon berries. And she had sieved the Saskatoon berries out and threw them out to the chickens to eat. And Baba came for a visit. She went outside and all the chickens were passed out from eating these berries. And Baba came in and said to Mom, "Your chickens are all dead, something's wrong." And the mom goes out and she figured it out that they were drunk and passed out. Got the chickens drunk. There's a few mean roosters. When I was older and lived at home with Sean, he was like little, went in to help Grandma feed the chickens at 3 and he got attacked by roosters, so he's been afraid of chickens and birds ever since.
Oh, interesting.
Pretty guy, poor guy.
That would have been around the time the Birds came out by Hitchcock too, so there was kind of some serendipity of birds being terrifying.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, and then later, the Donovan school closed when my brother Tom was in grade 4. He had to come to Delisle Elementary here. And so Mom got a bus driving job.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
She loved that job. She loved it because she'd come up in the morning, have coffee, visit everybody, go home, do her stuff, come up, get a chocolate milk and a whatever, and drive again. And she loved the kids, she loved the families, and it brought in extra money. And she got her to town, right?
In retrospect, that is perfect for her.
It was, yeah. She had to retire when she was 65. She was so upset about that because she was fit, right? And nowadays, you don't have to. I have friends that are 70 and drive school bus, but she was really upset about that. And so that's what my mom and dad did. My dad retired when he was 61, and he got his substitute bus driver license, and he would drive for Mom every now and then, if she was in the middle of something, or for other bus drivers too. But dealing with the kids just wasn't really his cup of tea, so he didn't. He did it once or twice, I think, for other people, but mostly drove for Mom. And it was funny when he took his test, his bus driver's test, he had, he's driving along and he pulled over onto the shoulder to let traffic go by because school buses are slower. Well, that was an immediate fail. Well, he was so upset because he was just trying to be a thoughtful driver. And in the Army, he actually taught people how to drive. So he felt he knew what he was doing, right? So the fact that he failed and Mom got her license first time round just irked him like he never believed. We're not happy about that. So then it comes to grade 7, and I went from a school of maybe 30 people to a school of 400.
Okay, hold on.
Yep.
So, okay, you mentioned being a quiet kid. When I think about your family, that it must have been weird.
It was hard.
So, a couple things about that. So, your family definitely leans towards that active extroversion, things like that.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And then, what was it like being the quiet person in that environment?
Yeah, it was because of Dad. Dad was very outgoing, so was Mom, but Dad encouraged debate. And of course, we ate every meal together at the table, right? So he encouraged debate and arguing and all that, and I didn't like that. I don't like it to this day when people raise their voices. So I never took part in that. I watched.
So, what did this look like? You guys are all sitting at the dinner table.
Yeah,
and then...
Dad would start talking politics
Okay.
or union or who the prime minister was and what a jerk he was, or any locally like news event, right? And then he'd give his opinion and everybody would kind of give their opinion back and forth. And he was like an agitator, right? He would take the opposite stand just to see you argue your point, to see if you really believed that, right? I explained to him I was not comfortable with it then, and I'm not comfortable now. I believe what I believe, and on the spur of a moment, I cannot say what I'm feeling. I need to think it out, and especially in a confrontational way like that. But I think that's why they're all extroverts, is because
I'm like
Dad.
seeing a lot of myself now. The more we talk,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what I'm like. You get, you know, it's more like you need to process it and calculate it and make an informed decision. And it isn't about like charisma in that moment. You need to act objectively and procedurally.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yes,
Anyway.
you as a child, you're a lot like I was, right? I lived in my head a lot. I thought of a lot of things. I had ideas, like when we were in elementary school in Donovan, I thought one time we were driving somewhere and I'm sitting in the back seat and daydreaming, because that's what I did. And I thought we should have a school newspaper. And so Heather and I, we started a little school newspaper at our Donovan school. And it went for a little while till the teacher decided it was too expensive to print them off and stuff like that. But that was the kind of kid I was. Actually, I kind of was made fun of because I liked to sit and read. Dad used to say, oh yeah, just put her in the corner with a book, she'll be fine. Whereas the others required a lot of attention because they were active, right? I didn't like to be uncomfortable out there. I can remember one time there was this slough that's out in the field by Mom and Dad's, and my brothers used to always go to the Willows, they called it. And they would have such fun.
That's such a fancy name.
Talking about the Willows. And I was like, what kind of fun is out there, right? So I said to Mom one time, I'm going to go to the Willows. Okay, she said, see you later. So I walked out there, and all there is a bunch of trees around the slough. And I'm like, well, there's nothing here. Like, what the heck? And I just kind of was disgusted and went back. But, I mean, they hunted, they played swords, they would break bird eggs on a tin lid and fry them in the sun and eat them, and like all things that I just a little grossed out by. But every now and then I'd think they were doing something really fun and I was being left out and I should do that, right? Growing up, one thing I really appreciated about my mom was we were allowed to have any pet we ever wanted, right?
Cool.
And they were allowed to come in the house, whereas when Baba, like animals were for a point, you had a dog to keep the predators away from your cattle and pigs, and you had a cat to catch mice. So when I had cats all the time. I had little cats, and they slept with me, and they were my cats. And when Baba would come, she'd take the broom, kick my pets outside, and we just put up with it because she was just there for a few days, right? But I didn't like that much. And we had rabbits in the house. One time, one rabbit ate the wires on something, but Petey was his name. I have pictures of him trying to eat off my brother's plate. He was a big black rabbit, and they had babies. Oh, they were so cute.
Any pet salamanders?
Oh no, Mom hated salamanders, and so did I. There was a dirt basement in our house. Mom dug it out, pail by pail. She would,
Oof.
like 5-gallon pail, right? She would, because before it was just a space for a furnace. But she dug out, she wanted like a place for potatoes and like a root cellar. So her and the older brothers, they dig and fill up 5-gallon pails and bring it out and bring it out. And that's how we got a basement. But there were salamanders and newts down there. And if she found them, she'd just come flying up the stairs and screaming. So if she wanted potatoes or something and she'd seen the salamander down there, she sent me down there to get them. Well, she was scared. I sure as heck was going to be scared as seeing those little things. Ugh. But later on in life, like when us kids were growing up, they got a developed basement put in and stuff. But yeah, that's how we got the basement.
I know even like, just in my time there, the basement kept evolving and growing. It's just kind of, yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, that was your guys' play area down there a lot.
So what were you reading?
Well, the first, when I was in grade 4, that's when I really discovered reading. And before that, summertime was really boring for me because, you know, I didn't do outside like my brothers did, and I just had my friend and we'd play stuff. But I never even got like a doll till I was 10 because we were poor. So I'd cut out catalogs and make paper dolls and things like that.
Cool.
The neighbors had board games, so we would play the board games and stuff. But where was I going this? Oh, in the summer, I learned how to read, and I really liked the Hardy Boys detective series. And my aunt had the complete set of Anne of Green Gables, hardcover, and she let me read it. Oh, I treasured that so much. I loved that series of books. And so that was kind of what I did. When we got to there wasn't a library in Donovan School, right? And well, there was, but like they were like encyclopedias and things like that, not very interesting stuff. When I got to Delisle and there was a library in the high school, I always had books out. I read a variety of books. And because I was a reader and nobody else in my family was, I was always expected to go to school, graduate high school, blah, blah, blah. Where the rest of my siblings, they were not. They were expected, as soon as you could work, you quit school and you went to work. I remember like Bernie and Ed, they were 15, 14 maybe, and they went and worked for farmers. And then they went to school from there and came home, and one of the farmers was Mackenzie's. Another one was my cousin Bob Hogan. That's where Ed went. And they earned money that way. And also, my parents didn't have to feed them, right? So it was less money for them. So they were gone a lot. So I was lonely. My oldest sister, Sue, got married. My next sister, Kathy, when she was 16 or 17, she quit school, got a job in the city, and she would take the bus home. Like they had at the time, the government had a bus that drove people places, and she would take the bus out to Donovan and stop, and we'd go pick her up, and I would snuggle her. I missed her so much. I loved her smell. She was very fashionable, right? She always wore the latest styles and everything, and so I missed her so badly because there was just me and Tom at that time, and I didn't really get along with Tom so much. I was older sister, and I made fun of him a lot. And, you know, just what sisters do, I guess. So that was kind of growing up. That was really encouraged and valued. Work was valued. How fast you could do things was valued. Going to school, sitting around, not so much valued.
Okay, couple things there. So you're 10 years old. What does your day look like then? You get up, you get on a bus, you go to school.
No, I didn't ride a bus till I went to Delisle Composite, and I was 12 then.
Okay.
So I walked to school every day, came home for lunch. Mom always had lunch for us, and the Flintstones would be on, and we could watch the Flintstones and eat our meal and then walk back to school. And then after school, you know, we dawdled on our way home and walked home. When I was a teenager, then we took the bus to Delisle, My bus driver was Dawn Weiler, and Heather and I sat together all the time, and I got to, before that, I couldn't play sports that costed money. Like I wanted to take figure skating, but they couldn't afford it because my brothers were playing hockey. And that was, everything. All their Christmas gifts were either hunting and camping or hockey equipment and stuff like that. And mom and dad, they used to keep a chart on the bulletin board, and they would get like X amount of cents for an assist or for a goal, Bernie and Ed. And so there was always that competition between them, who could get more goals. And Ed got more. He was faster than Bernie. Bernie was a good hockey player, but just not quite as fast and passionate as Ed was. So when I went to high school, I got to join intramurals, and that's free, right? I didn't have to pay to be on the volleyball team or the curling team. I joined everything, and it was at noon, so I could play badminton at noon. But then I tried out for teams, and I was on the curling team. So I made the curling team, and we just played other schools and stuff like that. And also in track and field, I was not a runner, but I was good in throwing events like javelin, discus, shot put, that kind of thing. So I did well in those events. My sister Kathy and brothers, they did well in the running events. I can remember Kathy did the hurdles, and my brothers did the races and stuff, but I was not good at that. Also, then I got older and I played ball with the Donovan women's team, which my dad coached, and my mom was the back catcher on. But go ahead.
And just hearing like kind of tidbits of like your life and dad's life, it seems like baseball was a huge thing back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's still big, but.
And it didn't cost much to play, right? All you needed was running shoes and a mitt. The bats and everything were provided by the club. Nowadays, you buy your own bat and you have to wear a helmet and all this business. We wore blue jeans and shoes, and that was it, right? But the ball team from Donovan, the Donovan ladies, was a really good ball team. Really good. Dad coached it, and they were very competitive all around. They did very well. And back in the day, sports days were a big thing. So first weekend in June was always a sports day in Swanson. The July 1st, there was a sports day in Conquest. And so you'd pay a small fee, maybe $10 to enter your ball team, but you could win money back. And so Donovan always won. The ladies always won money back. I don't know what they did with it after that, but if there was a foul ball, we'd run and catch it and get 25 cents for picking that up, and we could use it in the booth because my mom and dad didn't have money to give us to go spend in the booth. My mom packed lunches, right, for us. But if we wanted a treat, you chased those balls. So even when Sean was young, that's what they did. They picked up beer bottles and drinking, and chased foul balls and got money that way.
So, wild kind of culture shock here is that like I was looking into rec baseball teams. It's like $700 to $900 to get a rec team for the summer. So like what you're saying is like, wow,
that's
wild
crazy.
comparatively.
Yeah, no, and like social events were so much easier and less expensive. Like I said, dances. When I was a teenager, say 14, 15, there was a man in town. They had a band. And the parents decided we needed to learn how to do the old time dances. The waltz, the chateau, the polka, the two-step. And so every Friday night, we'd go to the Swanson Hall. The band would be there, and it worked for them because it was practice for them. And it worked for us because it kept the teenagers out of trouble, and we learned how to dance. And I loved that. That was so much fun. I loved to dance. When we went to Starlings, because they're both mom and dad worked away a lot, we had a lot of free time after school together. And so we would put music on and dance. I learned how to jive that way. There was, Heather had a brother, David, that was actually my age. We would dance, learn how to jive. When we went to dances, we could dance because we were taught and we knew how.
So with that, like I was just telling you before we started recording about my schedule and how it's like it's craziness,
Yeah.
and that's only like a tenth of what is available and what I would like to do.
Yeah.
Like, was it like that when you were younger?
No.
Was it you just kind of did what there was? Or
Yeah,
like,
that's what we did. And life was slower, much slower. Like every Sunday, like there was a church that was near mom and dad's, and mom and dad didn't necessarily go to church, but they sent us, right? And it was always family day. So my aunt and uncles, that one Uncle Ab, which is Gordie Howe's dad, and his wife would come out. Aunt Allie and Uncle Walt, which is Rita's mom and dad, they would come, and mom would cook a feast, and they'd play cards. Games were very big in our family. You had to be 16 before you could play cards, and if we didn't have company, Sunday we'd play Monopoly. Grandpa loved Monopoly. He used to call it Monop. And that's, and I'm sure that's where a lot of my brothers got the buying and flipping gene from, was Monopoly. We played Remoli. Board games was a big thing that we did as a family.
Another thing that amazes me is when you talk about people going right into work and not going into school and like not finishing high school.
Yeah.
That is unimaginable now. That
Yeah.
is like, even not doing university is like good luck.
That's
completely
true.
unimaginable.
True.
That's wild.
Yeah, and I got married when I was in grade 12, March. I was pregnant, but that wasn't why I married him. I mean, I was in love. I wanted a family since I was like a little kid. And when I was a teenager, I used to tell people I wanted 8 kids. And I did. I wanted a big family. And so back in the 70s, going to high school when you're pregnant was kind of, you didn't do that. Never occurred to me to quit. Ever. It was expected of me, like the way I was raised, because I did well in school. I mean, I never wrote a final exam until grade 12 because they had this thing called recommends. If you had marks over a certain point, you didn't have to write the final because you were going to pass. So I never wrote a final till grade 12. And so and they were only if the teacher wasn't approved to do a provincial final test, right? So I never wrote a final. I did really well in school with minimal effort. And so it never occurred to me to quit school. And the teachers, they kind of didn't know what to do with me because I'm pregnant. In June, I'm like 7 months pregnant, 8 months almost. No, Sean was September 9th, so August, I was, 6 months pregnant, very big. And they kind of just didn't know what to do with me. They ignored me. I had one teacher that did talk to me and ask me how I was doing and how I was feeling and how things were going. And I really appreciated that. I took a page out of his book. His name was Mr. Vinish. And when I became a teacher, I came across him. He was a member of the STF. And I told him that story and thanked him. So that was pretty cool. But anyway, it never occurred to me to quit school. When I was in high school, I wanted to be a nurse. I thought that was like the cool job.
Why is that?
I don't know. I thought it was cool.
This brings me, what's interesting is like when I was a kid, I wanted to be a lawyer really bad, and then it switched and changed and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And now that I'm like settled as an adult, I think I would have actually been pretty good at that. Like it would have leaned towards kind of my skills and abilities. So
Yeah.
that's interesting.
One thing when I was raised, mom and dad had really strong values. And like you never looked down on anybody. You never were allowed to think you were better than anybody because both my mom and dad had really tough childhood. Really, really hard childhoods. And so we were raised to never look down on anybody, think you're better. We were raised, that was one. The next thing was don't complain because life could always be worse, and it often was for other people. And give the underdog a chance. Those were the 3 big things. Never give up. Work ethic was huge too. So Now,
Sorry,
go
just
ahead.
commenting on the nurse thing. Do you think that if you pursued that path, that you would have liked it?
No,
Interesting.
no. I have a soft heart, and it would have been too hard for me. Way too hard for me. By this time, I'm thinking I'm tough, right? Like I'm a teenager and I know stuff and I'm dating boys and I'm tough. But that wasn't true to who I was, right? I was the quiet kid.
That's interesting. So, like, just seeing people suffer as a nurse
Yeah.
would be difficult?
If somebody said they had a sore arm, pretty soon, guess what? I had a sore arm.
Mm.
Yeah. So, I graduated, but the day I didn't get to go to my graduation because that was the day I had Sean. At that time, they had a fall graduation because they didn't want you to graduate if you really didn't pass all the tests. And Sean was supposed to be due like on the 17th. Graduation was the 9th, and my mom made me a, maternity graduation dress, beautiful green material. And the day before grad, we were in the city shopping, and I said to Mom, I'm not feeling well. Like, I've got a pain in my back. She looks at me and she goes, you're in labor. And I said, oh, no. No, I'm not. I'm not due yet. Got graduation tomorrow. Well, guess what? I was in labor. Ended up in the hospital. And I had a really, really long labor. Ended up having to have a C-section. And that's when I found out I wouldn't be able to have my family of 8. Because I had difficulty with delivery and somewhat carrying. So I had this beautiful little boy. We lived in an apartment downtown, but there was a problem. My husband drank too much and he was violent.
So you're living in Saskatoon
now? No, we were living in Delisle. By the post office was a 2-story old apartment block that we lived in. I can't even
imagine that. Okay.
And my husband worked at the welding shop there. And I was stay-at-home mom because that's what you did, right? You had a baby at that time. You didn't, it wasn't so popular to put your kid in daycare and then go to work.
It's weird, like, to see that culture shift of, like, not a lot of stay-at-home moms now. And, like when we lived in North Battleford and I was looking for employment and doing all the home tasks, like, that is insanely hard. It
Yes.
is a grind, a nasty grind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was what was expected, and I was content with that. That I had my family, right? But I just couldn't tolerate the abuse. So, be a little bit more than a year after I got married, we'd had a difficult night, and I told my husband, I said, if you don't quit drinking, I'm going to leave. And he said to me, oh, you'll be back. Well, every Sunday we would go to Mom's. Us kids that are adults now would go to Mom's and Dad's for supper on Sunday. And of course my aunt and uncles are there. It's a big to-do, and I'm just sitting there and I don't know what to do.
Is everyone living kind of in the same area here?
Yes, Ed and Janet lived in Delisle. He worked for a little bit with Grandpa, and then he started his own construction. Bernie lived in the city. He had married a girl and he lived in the city. So yeah, we were all pretty local, except for Kathy and Sue.
And is this at the time of the Vietnam War, approximately?
Yes.
Yeah, because, big military history in your family, and then big military history amongst, like, even my generation, but it kind of skipped a generation. I know I talked to, a couple of your siblings in the Vietnam War. It put a lot of bad taste in people's mouths about the military, and it was interesting that continued on with the family, but kind of skipped a generation.
It was about like in the 77 when I remember watching on the news. I mean, I could get the year wrong, but there's a famous picture of a helicopter with a rope hanging down and them trying, maybe you remember it, Al, trying to get all of the military out of Vietnam in time. And
what was it about? I'm not very historically aware on this. What was it about Vietnam that made people so against
it? It was a war that cost a lot of lives that we really shouldn't. Canada was not involved in the war. It was the Americans, and it cost a lot of lives, and it was a war that really they shouldn't have been involved in, anyways. Right? There was a war going on. They wanted a say in that part of the world, probably for economics. And so they sent people off to war. And the sad part of that was when the veterans came back, because people were so against the war, they treated the vets poorly. Whereas where my dad, when he came back, there was no, like my dad had PTSD, but at that time it was not something they talked about or even knew about. But they were encouraged to drink and talk with their mates about the war, right? So my dad never talked about the war until his very late years. He actually shared most of his experiences with Tom. But they would go to the Legion or the bar and drink. And so my dad drank a lot. But later on, it became less and less and less, right? So that's why we were so poor, because Grandpa drank a lot. So that's how, in fact, when he was got really ill and ended up having to go to a care home, I remember going with Mom to see a psychiatrist, and she diagnosed Dad with PTSD. Because he would have really bad nightmares, wake up. One time he woke up and he was choking Mom. Another time, like, we were never allowed to see fireworks. We were never allowed to play cowboys and Indians with guns, because guns kill. And you were only, you used guns to hunt meat, because we ate a lot of wild meat, right? Because that was a way for us to get our protein. So it showed up in our whole life. Yeah. Go ahead.
So you're bringing up a lot of interesting tangents here.
Yeah.
So you talk about, okay, eating wild meat, and I know Grandma's garden is legendary. Like,
yeah.
I would love to have that garden. It is incredible.
Yeah.
So what was, like, how did meals work then, particularly in the winter? So you guys would have that root cellar.
Yep.
Tell me all about, where did you get your food from?
Well, so there was hunting season in the fall for deer. So we all, like Dad, Bernie, Ed, Uncle Ken, Nelson, they all hunted deer. I can remember watching them butcher the deer on our kitchen table.
Oh,
the table I have here that we eat off.
I remember being a kid and not knowing they did that, and Grandma had all these sheds, and I opened a shed and there was a dead deer hanging, and I was like, ah!
Yeah, because they had to hang for a while, right?
Oh,
and
man,
I hated
funny.
the smell of them butchering the meat, cutting it up. But that's what we ate, and if we got low on meat,
where would you store this meat? Like, did you just dry it, or?
Well, no, they had a deep freeze.
Okay.
Yeah, an ice box way back in the day, and then a deep freeze, right? And Grandma canned her garden, and chickens, and fish. She canned all that, right? So we had that. And then we had deer meat. Or if somebody had a cheap beef, then we'd buy that. Their friends had sheep, and I remember we bought sheep. Oh, it was mutton. It was awful. I couldn't eat it. And when we were growing up, you ate what was cooked, or that was that, right? So I didn't eat it. But Mom baked bread. She made our homemade crackers. She made terrific soup. There was nothing she couldn't cook. She made, do you know what head cheese is? It's from the pig's head. It's all the meat and gluten, or it's gelatin. That's what it is. And she cut it off and cook it and put it together, and it was a sliced meat that you could put in sandwiches.
How was it?
I liked it. It was good, but watching her do it was gross.
It sounds gross.
Yeah, because she'd peel, and she also deep fried the pig skins for little treats.
Oh,
yeah, those were good. And like, she was just a heck of a cook. And the garden, like, without the garden, we would have never. Like, how would you feed the big family that we had?
Okay, you gotta help me out build this memory here. So we would always, like, when I was a kid, we would go out and have, for sure, the big meals, and even those Sunday meals. We would go out and Grandma would cook. So classic dishes, classic Sunday night at Grandma's, what would be on the table? We would see
Chicken.
Some
Halushki.
Halushki for sure.
Cabbage rolls.
Oh, yes.
Cabbage rolls, halushki pierogies. mashed potatoes.
Oh yeah, the
Yeah,
classic.
always mashed potatoes. And because Dad didn't like pasta, or rice.
You gotta be kidding me. I don't like pasta.
No.
That's a crazy
No.
coincidence.
And like when Mom cooked macaroni, it was mixed with tomatoes. That was a huge treat for us. Huge. We didn't have cheese because it was expensive, but sometimes Mom and Dad would buy a hunk of bologna like about this, and she would cut off thick slices and fry them for our meal. Oh, that was a treat too, right? Fried bologna. It was something different we never had, right? She never made sausage. She made her own wine. It was really good, really good. Saskatoon berry wine, especially. They made, we call it hooch, but it's like you have a still and you make booze.
Oh, like a
And-
moonshine almost?
Yeah,
Or-
that's what
okay.
it is. And so for Sue's wedding and for Kathy's wedding, that's what they had. And in bottles was the homemade wine and the hooch. You never had a liquor license, right? The men always went outside the hall and drank. But yeah, that's what was there for the bar, right? And yeah, so if hard work and growing things could get you anywhere, my mom got us through. She was phenomenal. Phenomenal. Not that Dad wasn't. He did his part, right? His role. As a kid, like the boys, they got hockey all the time. Dad was there taking them to the rink, doing that. He coached ball. He did a lot of things that other dads didn't do that way. And Mom was, the cook extraordinaire. She, when we went places, we took food with us. That's the way it was.
It must have been really weird for him to navigate like being an adult and being a dad after the war, and then seeing the next generation of adult men with such drastically different norms.
Yeah.
It must have been just wild for him.
And he was old fashioned too. Like his growing up, he was never really parented. His mom died when he was, I think, 4. And in that day, dads didn't keep the kids. They farmed them out. And he came from a massive family. And so Grandpa just farmed his kids out like they were gifts, right? Uncle Walt landed in a fairly nice family, and they kept him, whereas my dad was a bit of a scamp. And when he went to foster families, those kids were there to work and to earn, because it was costing them money to feed those kids. Those kids were to work. And so he had to go to school. They would keep him as long away from school as they could, but then there was a person that checked to make sure kids were going to school. So then he'd have to go to school, and pretty soon his worthiness was no good anymore, and he was gone, right? Moved on. And so then he never saw his sister and brothers till he was 13. He saw his sister was 2. No, Dad was 6 when his mom died. His sister was 2. She was, they thought, adopted by this family, but she wasn't formally adopted. She was raised by the Oviates. And so when Dad was a teenager and more able to fend for himself, he found his siblings. And they developed a really strong family relationship. And that's where we all come from, family first, family, right? Because he never had that growing up. So he wasn't really parented. So as an adult, as a dad, he was kind of on his own, right? Like to figure out how to be a dad. And my mom, she said, because there's 12 years difference between the two, she said that one of the things that attracted her to Dad was that he had a 2-year-old daughter. And that would have been Sue, because his first wife died in childbirth. She was delivering a baby boy, and they couldn't get the baby out. At that time, there was no doctor to do a C-section, which was relatively new. And so the baby died and she died. She bled to death in my dad's arms. So he was left with a 2-year-old daughter. And because he was panned out as a kid, there was no way in hell he was going to do that to his daughter. So he met Mom, and he said, hey, you want to look after my little girl and be my housekeeper? She was 17. She goes, yeah. She had a bad childhood too, like really, really nasty mom. And she said a lot of the attraction to Dad was that little girl. She loved kids as well. And she had a little brother that my Baba, to train him to go potty, she would burn his fingers with matches, right?
Jeez.
And Mom was about 9 at the time, and she told me this story. She had a fit. She said, "You're never going to burn his fingers again." And so Baba said, "Okay, you train him. You do his diapers." And she did. But that was just how she was with kids. She loved kids, right? So I think that's where I get that from. And she loved animals. So that's why we were allowed pets all the time. And our house was a house, even though we didn't have a lot, I always was able to bring my friends over for sleepovers whenever I wanted. They'd come home on the bus and, you know, they were there. Same with my brothers. Everybody was always welcome. Both Mom and Dad were that way. Everybody was welcome at our house. Mom used to joke on the weekend. She'd get up and look by the door to see how many pairs of shoes were there, to see who was there sleeping over. And so, you know, they were really good that way. Very outgoing. That's where that outgoingness comes from, right? So what part of my life? Okay.
So yeah, okay. So you're with Sean's dad, and you went back for Sunday dinner.
Right. And Mom's teasing me because we'd been out at a wedding dance the night before about being so quiet. And I pulled my hair to the side, and she could see that I was pretty bruised up. Well, there was no way I was going back to him after my family knew that, because they had no idea.
Did Grandpa know about that? I can't
Yes.
imagine. Like, Ed's told me some of the stories about Grandpa on the railroad.
His temper.
He's like...
Yes,
and
so...
he told me this story of this, like, when he came back from the war and was on the railroad, and someone pulled a knife on him, and he just beat the life out of the guy.
Yeah.
And, like...
like, you're gonna pull a knife on me, buddy?
Yeah, like, you gotta kill me, because, like...
Yeah, because you're going down.
Yeah,
exactly. And that was his whole life, right? He had to fight for himself. So, my aunt and uncle Gordy's mom and dad were there. Aunt Allie and Uncle Walt were there. They were all sitting outside. It was a beautiful day. Mom says to me, "Go to your room upstairs." I'm a married woman with a child. And you know what? I did it. I was just such a mess. I didn't know how I was going to live anymore. So I went upstairs. She went out to the yard, told them what was going on. I thought they were going to all jump in their cars and go beat the shit out of him. I was scared.
That's what I'm thinking right now, just knowing that.
And I begged them not to. My brother's the same thing, right? They wanted to go hurt this guy because they were very protective of me. Like, as a sister, like Ed and Bernie, like they were protective of me, always growing up, and Kathy, and like I was well protected as a little girl. So they wanted to go beat him up, and I begged them not to. So Mom comes and she goes, "I'm taking you to the hospital." And I'm going, okay, it's a big meal, everybody, what's going to happen here? So she took me to Outlook Hospital, and she goes, "And I'm going into the doctor with you because you're not going to be able to lie to him and tell him how this happened. I want it documented." Okay, so he came in, I told him, it was all written down. I probably would have gone back if it wouldn't have been for my family, because he, he wanted me. He was an alcoholic, he's sick. He wanted his son, his wife back, but there was no way I was going back. They were like a herd of elephants, when there's a wounded one in the middle. They all circled and protected me. So he knew my mom drove bus, so he would try to contact me when I was alone. So I was never allowed to be alone. Sean and I rode the school bus. Eventually I went and stayed with my sister Sue, and there was a long driveway into their house, and he used to sit at the highway. And I was never allowed to be alone there. Either one of the workers, or like if Sue and Ken had to go somewhere, somebody always stayed with me to keep me safe. So that was in May, and time's coming on. I have no money.
Yeah, so you're like 19, 20?
I was 18.
Okay.
18. I had no money. I had a child to support. My Sean's dad wasn't giving me any money. And everybody's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Like, you should get a job. Support yourself, right? So I said to my sister, Sue, I said, I think I want to be a teacher. I think I want to go to university. I don't know where it came from. It just, I think I want to go to university. In the meantime, I'd been applying for jobs. And I got offered a job in Wynyard at a chicken processing plant. At the same time, I'd been accepted into university. So I can remember being at Sooncan's, phone rings, and the guy is offering me a job. And I said to him, no, I think I'm going to go to university instead. And he was so supportive. I didn't know how I was going to pay for it. I didn't know where I was going to live. Nothing, but I was going to go to university. Mom and Dad lost their shit. They figured, okay, go to school, but go to school for a few months, be a lab tech or a secretary or something, get out there and support your family, right? I can see their point. You just want to be a teacher because Sue wanted to be a teacher, blah, blah, blah. So I went and I lived.
So no one else went to university?
I was the only one that graduated high school.
Okay.
Yeah, so my girlfriend was going to university at the time. She helped me get registered because I was lost, right? It's a big campus. I'd never lived in a city before. I was overwhelmed. But I moved in with Bernie and Thea. They lived in the city at the time, and Thea babysat Sean while I went to university. I took the bus. And I always got lost, and it was always packed. And I lived there about 6 weeks, and it did not work out. It was pretty bad, but I was still staying in the basement because I had no choice, in my opinion. And one time, Dad and Mom came. There had been a big dust up, and I was alone at the house. And Dad came in. And he said, "You're coming to live with us." And I'm going, "I have to go to school." "Yep, but you're not staying here anymore," because it was a bad situation, right? So Sean and I moved home, and he was a year old. Yep, he was just a year old, and Mom babysat, and I had an old car, and I drove into university every day. So they supported me that way. By this time, a friend of the family was a lawyer. So Mom and Dad phoned him up, and he's an old family friend. And I got my divorce through him. I remember going to court, and the judge saying to me, my ex showed up, because he did not want the divorce. He tried everything to try to get me back. And the judge said to me, and this is like 1979, when divorces weren't common like they are now. He turned to me and he goes, "You're 18 and you're giving up on the marriage?" And I looked at him and I said, yes. To university for a year, and that's when I learned study habits, because everything just didn't come like that, right? And also how to write tests and that, but I needed to support my son. So I applied for and I got a job as a teacher's associate at the Lease Cutterite Colony. So I moved up to Marshland.
Hold on a second. That's fascinating. But university and generally in school, can you draw some parallels between, first off, what elementary school was then versus what it is now? And also university, because university, even like I went back there on the weekend and it's been 4 years and it's drastically different. And it's just like, I assume there was no computers or anything weird.
No, there wasn't any computers. The biggest difference in elementary school now is if you got into, when I was a kid, if you got into trouble at school and your parents found out, you got trouble at home too. They supported the teacher. The teacher was an important part of that community, as was the minister. They were they were the authorities, the experts. They weren't questioned. As a teacher, there's no respect, a lot of disrespect, being questioned all the time.
You're talking now?
Yes. And the parents are overly involved. Most of the time, if you tell them their kid did blah, 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 well, it's your fault. I mean, there's still the regular families, right, that are involved in their children's education. And appropriately and they support you and you have discussion, I would say that's the 60% of the parents, but then there's the other parents who are negative and overly involved and make life quite difficult. As a teacher, you're supposed to professionally recommend, encourage people to go into that profession. I would not in good conscience do that. No, I wouldn't want my children to be a teacher.